Recently, Professor Alison Milbank published a book called God and the Gothic. So I thought it would be interesting to invite her to come in today and to tell us why study God and the Gothic in a theology department. Well, it's easy to see why you should study God, but study God and the Gothic in a theology department.
That is a good question, and many Gothic scholars would ask the same question, because the way they see it, Gothic are tales of incarceration and entrapment, often by monastic tyrants and usurpers, and the protagonist escapes. And this is usually interpreted as the narrative of the Enlightenment itself, in which society escapes from superstition and religious entrapment. Therefore, it is routinely read as a secularizing narrative. But I seek to argue the opposite. I begin my book by showing that, in fact, these narratives are replayings of the Reformation, of Protestant maidens escaping from Catholic entrapment, and an early Gothic novel by Horace Walpole, The Castle of Otranto, almost has the story of Henry VIII and his wives and the divorce itself in the narrative, which is ironized and made fun of. So it can be seen, and I do argue, that it is in the beginning a very Protestant narrative. John Foxe, for example, in the Reformation period, the historian, wrote stories about heroines like Anne Askew, who is incarcerated in the Tower by the Catholic authorities and is not daunted and makes a mental escape even though she is tortured. So in the beginning, Protestantism is Gothic, if you like, and Foxe talks about escaping from Cain's castles, which are the monastic orders. But even Foxe in the very beginning realized that an awful lot had been lost. And in fact, the Gothic describes a double gesture, a gesture of escape from a Catholic past, and then nostalgia for that which you have lost. And in fact, Foxe was aware that they had destroyed the monastic libraries and was very sad about that, even though, that was the effect of the dissolution. And he sought also to argue that Protestantism was the true heir of Christianity, that it wasn't a new thing, but went back to the beginning, and there had in fact been a usurper in between. And so I argue that this is a kind of buried narrative behind the early Gothic fictions. And there are, of course, a whole body of fictions that come out of Scotland, which are Calvinist in origin. And I would include in that The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Stevenson, as well as James Hogg's Confessions and Memoirs of a Justified Sinner. And this is truly Calvinist. It's about duality. And Calvinism in its origin is about double predestination, about questioning whether you are saved or not. And Dr. Jekyll's problem is that he has this Calvinist duality, you might even say a Christian duality. We are both beast and angel, said Pascal. But he can't deal with it. He can't deal with his duality. So his problem is trying to close it down. And so my book tries to argue that Calvinism often provides quite helpful kinds of anthropologies for writing Gothic fiction. And in fact, we read the double as, again, a secularizing thing, whereas it's often a kind of entry into a religious problem, the problem of St. Paul in the book of Romans. The good I would do, I don't do. The bad I would not do, that I do. That's what Stevenson's about. So in the 19th century, Gothic can be seen as going deeper into the self, and I try to show that this only deepens its religious engagement, as in the work of Irish or Anglo-Irish Gothic writers like Sheridan Le Fanu and Bram Stoker in Dracula. And there I argue that what they are seeking through the little group of people who are after the vampire Dracula in the novel of the same name is a kind of Christian ecumenism, where Catholics and Protestants join together to defeat the vampire, partly through textual sources, quasi-Bibles, if you like, and witnesses, and partly through Catholic sacramental practices, united in acts of self-sacrifice. And I read the whole Gothic tradition in the Protestant mode through Maturin all the way up to Stoker as a form of finding peace between different kinds of Christians. And then in the 20th century, I move into mystical Gothic, Gothic of Christian occultists, people like Arthur Marken and even Evelyn Underhill, who for a short while belonged to the Order of the Golden Dawn. And I seek in their writings an attempt to deal with materialism and argue that the way down into the darkness is the way up, a bringing of the material to full presence. So the whole thing, which ends up with M.R. James and Meade Faulkner, antiquarian ghost story writers, is thoroughly Christian and even Anglican, because it's seeking a mediation between material and spiritual, between Catholic and Protestant. And it finds its full place in a theology department where we're ready to read those texts on their own terms and not merely subvert them.
Alison, that is just a simply wonderful introduction. And if you want to know more, go and read Alison's book. Thanks, Alison.